keynote speaker is Sri Rajiv Malhotra. Rajiv Malhotra is a public intellectual and philanthropist. He is the founder, president of the Infinity Foundation, a non-profit organization in Princeton, New Jersey. He funds Infinity mostly with his own resources to foster harmony among the diverse cultures of the world. Prior to being part of the Infinity, he worked as a senior executive in several multinational companies, as a management consultant, and as a private entrepreneur. Many of the projects of this foundation strive to upgrade the quality of understanding of Indian civilization in the American media and educational system. The foundation has already given over 250 grants for research, education and philanthropy. Mr. Malhotra's pluralistic outlook stems from, he says, his Hindu background. He is an active writer, columnist and a speaker on a variety of topics, including the traditions and cultures of India, the Indian diaspora, America and the West. Mr. Malhotra has been appointed to the Asian American Commission for the state of New Jersey, where he serves as the chairman for the education committee created by the governor to start an Asian studies program in schools. He also serves on the advisory board of the American Red Cross in New Jersey. Details of his activities can be found on the Infinity Foundation website. He also chairs the board of governors of the Center for Indic Studies, University of Massachusetts, which is starting this initiative in JNU. I invite Mr. Rajiv Malhotra to give his keynote address. Mr. Rajiv.
Distinguished guests, my talk is taking up some of the issues that Professor Srivastava mentioned, and along similar lines, I want to discuss some meta-level issues concerning this initiative with an open mind. Trained scientist, but also somebody with a lot of sympathy for Indian civilization. First of all, I think that we should not assume that Sanskrit equals Vedic. And since the purpose of this pursuit is ancient Indian texts, there may be common texts also. There may be other texts also. And Sanskrit texts are also, there are a lot of Sanskrit texts that have nothing to do with religion. There's, in fact, someone had compiled a list of Sanskrit non-religious texts, which according to this person, far outnumbers the religious texts. I don't know if that part is true, but I certainly know that the list of known Sanskrit manuscripts, there are not of a religious kind, but deal with sciences, deal with what would today be called secular society. There's a large number of those. So I think the assumption that study of Sanskrit texts is Vedic also is a meta-level issue that we need to discuss. Another item is that not all valid knowledge has to be scientific. The assumption being made is that anything, if you want to show it's useful or valuable, you've got to say, oh, it's scientific. You know, this is the auditorium of arts and aesthetics. You do not evaluate art and aesthetics on a scientific criteria. You do not say that the value of this piece of music or the beauty of this sunrise has to be proven by a scientific means, because that is not accepted. That is not the criteria anybody in the world accepts for the validity or for the usefulness of a piece of knowledge. Yeah? Now, so I'm going to, in other words, science does not have a monopoly on knowledge. There's many kinds of knowledge which are very useful and very nice and very important, and not necessarily qualify as scientific. So I just want to clarify some of these. So what is science then? You can't say that science is any knowledge that is useful and valid is science. That is not true. Science is a particular kind of methodology, which is called the scientific method. So that knowledge which has been validated by this particular scientific method is scientific knowledge, but many other kinds of knowledge are also very useful that have not been validated in this manner. Yeah? So science is not a set of conclusions, but a pramana, a means of knowing. It's a methodology rather than a set of conclusions. And this scientific methodology requires that what you are claiming must be empirically provable, empirically based, and it must be reproducible and independently verifiable. So if those criteria are not met, then it could be very good stuff, but not scientific. And then for a scientific claim, the usefulness test is whether you can predict something new out of it. Can you predict tomorrow's sunrise? Yeah. Can you predict some solar eclipse? That is good. Can you predict when the next high tide will be? Yes. That's the kind of thing science does. It tells you it's able to apply a theory to forecast something and then validate whether it happened or not. So when you look at science in an ancient situation, we should be able to put it to the test. And if the test works, then it is valid. Otherwise, just because it was claimed, it is not valid. And science in the ancient systems, which is just a litany of list of claims that they did this and they did that, is hardly useful. It may be something that belongs in a museum, but to be useful, it should be the foundation for R&D and new knowledge that we can derive today. So these are some of the meta-level challenges that I want to present here. One of the questions to ask is whether science requires a model. Western science is based on models. So you build a set of assumptions, which is a model, and then based on that you have theorems and deductions and derivations, and then you test those out, and if they are true, then you assume the model must be valid, and this goes on until somebody finds something that is not valid derived on that model. So then you falsify that model, and somebody comes up with a better one, and the science goes on like that. You keep building a model, you derive conclusions from that model, and then you test those conclusions, and then you go back and build a better model. So the question is whether this is the only way to do science. That is what I want to ask. Is model-centric science the only kind of science? And I'll give you some issues that come out. For instance, acupuncture meets the scientific criteria that it is empirically provable, reproducible, testable by independent verification. In fact, if the American medical establishment acknowledges that acupuncturists are able to repair medical problems, cure medical problems at a rate of success that would qualify as valid medical treatment. So it is not some claim of the past. It is verifiable. It is verifiable empirically, and it can be done independently. Independent laboratories, clinical tests can verify it. Yet, the medical establishment does not give it parity with Western science. And the prejudice comes on the basis that it does not have a model that would be consistent with the anatomy as understood by Western science. So the acupuncturist will say, well, we don't have a model, but we are producing results. And if science is about producing results that are empirically verifiable, independently verifiable, and reproducible over and over again, we qualify. And the counter argument is, yes, you are empirically valid, but the model on which you are claiming this principle works, the theory that underlines your empirical activities is about chi and energies and these kind of things, and we can't validate that. So I've even asked some prominent acupuncturists, because I got cured. I had some problem, and Western medicine had said this is not going to, we cannot help you. And it was a Chinese acupuncturist in the US who cured me. So I became friends with these guys, and I wanted to find out, ask from him, what is your underlying theory? It works, it worked for me, but what is your theory on which it is based? And he confessed. He said, we do not feel we have a good model, because the ancient model that describes how it's working, scientifically by today's yardstick, you cannot sort of validate that model. So here is an example of a conflict between empirical validity on the one side versus the model on which it is based is not accepted. So you got to ask yourself, can you have science which is not model based? And this acupuncture is a good example of that. I'll give you another example from within Western science itself. Physics, that is my field. Physics models are not able to give you a complete description of life, biological entity. Because a physics model can explain the physical movements of things, but what then makes it life is not within the model of physics. There is that kind of an entity is not there. So biology has its own starting point. Because biology, you cannot derive all the biology from physics, because what makes it living dead is not an issue that physics is comfortable dealing with. And then biology cannot be the model on which you can derive, on which it has been formulated. And then psychology about an individual, one person at a time, cannot be the basis for deriving all of social sciences, although the society is a collection of individuals who are within the psychology model. So I've given you 4 separate domains. The domain of physics, the domain on which should be based the domain of biology, and then the domain of biology should be the basis on which ideally is based the whole domain of psychology, because the mind should be based on the biology of the brain, and then the domain of psychology should be the basis of the domain of sociology. But this is not actually the case in these 4 domains. The starting points, the building blocks, the models, the theories are pretty independent. And then of course there are people who try to integrate these after the fact. So within the Western scientific world itself, you have at least four different domains of models that are not entirely, they are not seamlessly related. They are not, integrated. It's not like from one you can derive all the rest of them. You don't sort of start with quantum physics and have a social theory at the other end. You just don't do that. So then this also leads to this paradox that, all of these are sciences. They are empirically based and they prove things that are verifiable. But you can argue that, okay, the nature of reality could not be 4 different models for 4 different purposes, and yet that happens to be the way it is. I also want to, this was a topic of conversation that the Infinity Foundation, we had a bunch of conferences on similar things like you're having, about sometime in the 1990s. And I was very impressed by Rodham Narasimha, who was in the Space Commission, a very top scientist in the Indian Space Commission. And he was the head of the the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore, which is part of the Indian Institute of Sciences. So we had a whole brainstorm and retreat, and we said, okay, there are Sanskrit texts that give you a formula for the value of pi, quite accurate. That give you velocity of light, quite accurate. So if science is what is empirically verifiable, then you can measure that formula with the velocity of light, and it seems pretty good. But there's no deduction. There is no evidence that they made any measurements. There is no proof from a model. So how was it done? And that puts it in the same league as acupuncture. You ask the same question to the acupuncturist, he says, frankly, I don't know, but the fact is it works. And if you're a good scientist, you have to accept it. If I'm showing you something which works as successfully as giving some allopathic medicine, I don't know how it works, but it works. So you can't reject it, simplistically. So what Rodham Narasimha came up with is to explain all this. He came up with a theory that Indian science is heuristic based rather than model based. Let me explain what that is. Heuristic is practically you try something and see if it works. You keep improving upon it and see if it works. So you keep testing, okay, I'll try this formula and see if it works and, for value of pi, and then I'll try another formula, and you keep trying, and by actual experience of doing things physically, you keep improving, and from what works, you have a formula that you believe until it is superseded by a better formula that is even more accurate. So his view is that a large part of the mathematics, for example, was not model-based and derived. Like Pythagoras' theorem, we know that Bodhanya theorem preceded Pythagoras' theorem, and it is a more rich theorem than the Pythagoras theorem. But unlike Pythagoras, Bodhanya's theorem was not sort of derived from a model, proven and all that. It's sort of a statement of here is how you do it. It is an algorithm. It is more like a computer algorithm that says do this, step one, then do that, and do that, and do that, and you'll be able to calculate it, and of course it's very good. But he didn't derive it from a model the way a Euclidean geometry teaches us to derive theorems from a model. So Radam says that model-based science is only one kind of science, and there is another kind of science that the Indians had. There's nothing to do with Vedas, by the way. It's ancient Indian science that is more based on pragmatic experience. So he called it algorithmic science. And today, at the cutting edge of computational theory, algorithmic science is back. In fact, in physics, simulating to come up with the conclusions rather than a model from which you can derive those conclusions is very much in terms of very, very large complexity, whether it is weather systems, weather forecasting, or galaxies, simulating galaxies. It is not models, because if you come up with a theoretical model, the number of equations is hundreds of thousands of equations that have to be simultaneously solved, with a huge number of variables, and even with these largest supercomputers you cannot solve those equations. So rather than model-based forecasting, it is heuristic forecasting. So you cannot sort of dismiss this alternative approach to science just because it is not model-based. Now, in the pursuit of ancient texts for science, we have to exclude certain things. We have to reject certain things. And I'm telling you, what I'm telling you are the principles on which Infinity Foundation 10 years ago started a project called History of Indian Science and Technology. So the project that you're recommending for INSA, we started 10 years ago. And our goal is to produce 20 volumes. Each volume on a particular topic, like Indian steel, Indian shipbuilding, Indian metallurgy, or whatever various things. And each done by actually a hard scientist, not by a text expert, but a physical scientist. So IIT professor doing the steel pillar and its history, another one do the history of Indian zinc, and another one on shipbuilding. So the experts are not text-based experts. They're certainly not religious people. They are hard scientists who are looking at physical evidence and coming up with a conclusion on what we can tell for sure. And now, one of the policies we made early is that evidence which is only in text but cannot be empirically verified has to be excluded. So Pushpak Viman, right away it was controversial. 10 years ago I stood before a whole gathering of people who were very excited about Pushpak Viman, and I said, you have to show me a crash site of a Pushpak Viman. You have to show me a wheel or a propeller or a wing, or you have to show me physical evidence of a Pushpak Viman somewhere. And until somebody shows me that, I just cannot include it as evidence, because it is not empirical evidence that is independently verifiable today. Similarly, nuclear bombs in the Mahabharata, you have to show me a crater of a bomb which is radioactive. I mean, if bomb was exploded, it would be radioactive, and I should be able to go and measure it today. And until somebody shows me that, I cannot accept it. Now, it is very interesting that these kinds of claims exist. Now, a claim on velocity of light we can verify. We accept it because we can take that formula and verify it. A claim on the value of pi we can verify. But a claim on Pushpak Viman or nuclear bombs or something else, unless somebody shows me physical evidence today, we really cannot verify. However, we've been able to find physical apparatus used for distilling metals. Zinc was distilled for the first time in India because Ayurveda, they needed to distill plants, to boil a plant and to liquefy all the oil, and the debris would be left behind, and in the retort, the gas would go on the other side and condense, and you'd get pure oil. This, for Ayurvedic purposes, was perfected by India. The earliest such evidence of this distillation you find in India than anywhere else, physical evidence. And then this was also then used, applied to metals. And so zinc was the first metal in the world. This is verified by the international metallurgical people. Was the first metal in the world that was distilled and purified, and 100% pure zinc was created, in fact, in Rajasthan. And we have a whole volume on how that was done, and all those archaeological sites are there. You can go there and see hundreds of retorts, centuries old, where zinc was made. And the international metallurgical people, I think they're based somewhere in Zurich, came and put a plaque certifying that this is the first place in the world that zinc was distilled. So this is an example of physical evidence verifiability based research, and we've been doing that for 10 years. We have 5 volumes done, and I gifted those to Mr. Prasad. He's Professor Prasad is today. I gifted those 5, and we have funded research on 20 volumes, each of them done by a very credible person. MGK Menon, very eminent guy. He is the head chair of our advisory committee, and Kapila Vatsyam. So this kind of research is needed, and I'm happy to say we've started it. So what does this do to text? Because this is hard evidence. This is where the Pakka scientist says, okay, I have a steel pillar, I can date it, and I can do all the metallurgical chemical analysis, and I can tell you how it was made, why it is stainless steel for so many years, and he can do that. Now, then what we are finding is there's a disconnect between the physical evidence-based hard science that we're able to verify on the one hand, and text. So here are, not only in some cases you have a text, you can't find physical evidence like Pushpak Viman, but the converse is also true, which is disturbing. Like there are a lot of physical samples of things, like Harappan tiles, of very high, requiring a very high temperature to make that. You can show that this kind of tile requires a certain temperature to make, which will be so robust and last so long and such and such. But people don't find the text to describe how it's to be made. Now, if the Harappan tiles are found over a period which is of a region which is very large, from the region of the Indus Valley, almost 2,000 sites exist from Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Punjab, Gujarat, all that. It's almost half the area of Europe. It's a huge area. It was not possible to have such standardized manufacturing without some kind of a text, some standards committee. And it is not simultaneous. The earliest such sample and then the latest such sample is 2,000 years. So over a huge period of time, over a large amount of space, a very standardized manufacturing of a very high technology was taking place. But we don't have texts. We don't have a text that tells us this is the standard how you make it, so everybody's making the same text over and over again for 2,000 years. We don't have that. So we have a physical evidence-based science and technology history, which is not supported in all cases by text. And conversely, we have claims of a scientific kind in text. Some of them are valid, like value of pi and the velocity of light, and some of them are not provable, like Pushpak Viman and nuclear bombs. And for some of these type of text claims, we don't have physical evidence. So one of the issues that this project should look at is, what do you do when there's this disconnect? Now, some claims I reject, which are very popular by Vedic scientists, like astronomical dating of a text. Because every time I have asked for a rigorous due diligence that this is the only possible outcome and not one possible outcome, one of many. It is the right outcome and not just one possible outcome. The discussion doesn't seem to get very far. If you look at certain events in Mahabharata, astronomical events. It said that when so-and-so was born, the stars were configured this way. When so-and-so was coronated as a king, the sky looked like that. If you take some of those and you do a simulation of, in any astronomy software, there's a lot of astronomy software where you can simulate what the date must have been. You can get certain old dates. But these samples that are selected in such research are not exhaustive. Certain dates, certain astronomical events are selected and their dates are computed. But there's many other astronomical events recorded in the Mahabharata which may not fit these dates. And so it is not valid science to select that which fits your theory and reject whatever doesn't fit. I mean, if you are doing a clinical trial, you cannot just take those people who are cured and ignore those people who are killed and say it is scientifically proven that this thing works. So I think to advance the field in an honest way and in a useful way, we have to be very critical of ourselves, and in the peer review we have to be able to ask sharp questions to each other and even refute and then come up with a better model. Because otherwise it is just nostalgia and chauvinism that just sort of keep building up, oh we're great and all that, with no critical inquiry and refutation. Science requires, a healthy scientific system requires very active refutation. You should have a very strict standard, you should ask hard questions, you should validate, even if it's unpopular, like acupuncture people are very right in saying, I don't care if my model contradicts and your model don't work, you try to refute the empirical evidence, we can cure thousands of people of certain things, and those guys are stunned that the model doesn't fit, but the empirical evidence is solid. That is a pretty good situation to be in. So, another point I want to talk about is inexact sciences. Science need not always be deterministic. It can be probabilistic also. For example, economics. People have got the Nobel Prize in economics, and like one Nobel Prize Chicago guy got 20 years ago or 15 years ago was basically a model on the stock market where he was able to demonstrate that if you do a certain way of allocating your assets, then the probability of beating the market is good. And he didn't say that every day you make more money or every quarter, every year, but because the probability is good and it's only probabilistic, therefore in the very long run you will beat the other model. So this is not a deterministic forecast. You can be losing for a while, but since the probability is on your side, the hope is that in the very long run you do better. So things like this are, economics is full of such probabilistic forecasting, and it's an inexact science. That does not make it invalid. That's my point. Even medicine, to have a drug that is tested, it is not that with certainty it will cure everybody all the time. If you can show in a clinical trial a certain improvement in probability, a certain percentage, if you say, okay, 40% of the people who take this are better off than those who don't take it, it's not necessary that it has to be a deterministic outcome. A probabilistic outcome is acceptable. So I'm going to, ask that, okay, you take some Indian traditional sciences and apply the same criteria to it. So for instance, you take astrology. It's not an exact science. It's not the claim that always it will come out. But the claim is that your probability is a certain way. Or something like Vastu, which is prediction. Science makes prediction. These guys make prediction that, okay, if you do this, you'll be better off. Or somebody who makes claims about past life, that you were this or you were that. In principle, it is verifiable. In principle, an astrological claim is verifiable. On January 1, you can get a panel of astrologers and you can ask them to make 10, 20, 50, 100 predictions. And on December 31st, you can have a panel of scientists go through it and see what was right, what was wrong, and how was it a fluke or was it beyond the realm of statistical error, statistical probability. And if the guy is 1 delta better than the probability curve, and he's doing okay, he's doing good. If he's 2 delta, he's great, and so on. You could rank and scientifically validate various kinds of astrological systems, various kinds of Vastu systems the same way, various kinds of claims about something that this guy, past life was there, you could go verify it, see if it's true or not. And while they are inexact, you cannot debunk them because you find some counter examples. Because it's an inexact science, it's giving you a probabilistic outcome. You have to evaluate it based on statistically whether it is making sensible or making useful predictions. So this kind of testing has not happened. You have to polarize people, and you have those who are so cynical that they do not want to test such a hypothesis. They think that this is taboo, this is creationism coming in. A good scientist cannot afford to be dismissive. He'll say, okay, you making the claim, we'll put it to test and we'll publish the result, and you may be valid, you may not be valid. We have to be very objective about it no matter what your claim is. After all, the acupuncturists have been able to do that. Their theory sounds very strange, that there's all these things called chi moving around and I'm going to put some needles and make it spin and you'll be fine. It sounds very voodoo. And they insisted you do clinical trials and reject us or accept us based on that and not on any other preconceived bias. So similarly, a whole lot of traditional Indian scientific claims need to be subject to this, but they have not been subject to this. So what are the types of inquiries, and I'll conclude with this, what are the kind of inquiries that I think are needed under this traditional Indian science project, or any traditional Indian science project? One is the UMass project, where I think the person who sponsored it made a very specific requirement that it has to be testable claims. Testable claims. Okay, very important. He didn't say, you got this money and you just tell me all the things somebody said they did that or this, that. That is unfortunately 90% of the discourse I come across in a lot of these conferences, and it is a disservice to the tradition because it is really not helping put it on a very solid foundation. So testable hypothesis, and the word hypothesis is very important. If a text says something, be it Pushpak Vivar, be it anything, you can say, okay, it's somebody's hypothesis. Science says you should say somebody's hypothesis. And now we want him to prove it, otherwise we can't accept it. It remains just an unproven hypothesis. So we need to generate from Sanskrit texts and other classical texts, a whole compendium of hypotheses there are there. And then we need to say, okay, which ones are, by their very nature, you just can't prove them because, or it'll be just not practical to prove them. We put them aside. And which ones are provable and high potential and useful. And that is where a lot of spirited, scientific, rigorous testing should be done. This is I'm hoping that we can do. Second kind of work I'm involved in is empirically evidence-based work, but with no theoretical texts available, like history of steel manufacturing or tile manufacturing and things of that sort, where we got a lot of physical evidence, but we just don't know how, why, who did it, when they did it. We know when, we can date that, but we do not have theoretical framework for these things. There are certain controversial scientific areas. I support those, even though they're controversial, because we should just apply scientific rigor and let the chips fall where they may. For instance, these yogis who claim that they bury themselves and they go without breathing and this and that. There was a grant we gave to some team from MIT that wanted to go, and at the Kumbh Mela 9 years ago, they wanted to go and measure some guys. And so we said, fine, do it. And these guys came back and published a report. It's on our website, and they said that yes, they were able to do very extraordinary things. Now there is no model of human physiology which explains all this. But lack of a model does not invalidate an accomplishment if it is empirically shown. Then there was a guy called Swami Ram who died a decade ago or so, and Mayo Clinic published a lot of research on him in the 1980s and 1970s, where he could stop his pulse for a long period of time, and he could also take 2 points on his arm and produce a temperature gradient of 10 degrees just by his mind. He could do all these things, and the scientists were amazed because this violated all the physiology and all the biological scientific models that they have been taught. They couldn't know how it's possible to do that. But the scientific community said we can't refute something which is demonstrated, even though it contradicts our models. So there is again a discrepancy between empiricism and models, and we have to be clear. The latest area where the West is harvesting a huge amount of Indian traditional knowledge in a very scientifically rigorous way is neuroscience. Neuroscience is very passionately, very actively involved in measuring the mental states achievable by Buddhist monks and yogis, Indian yogis. And for instance, there's a whole lot of research I follow in that area I've been looking at for over 10, 12 years. And it's the cutting edge of neuroscience now, because what they are finding is that this can be reproduced. This kind of effect can be empirically tested, independently tested. And so some of these meditators are able to produce states which the Western models of the body and mind think are impossible. With the very high resolution functional MRIs, you can see exactly which part of the brain is active and which part is not active. And so when the person shifts from one imagery to another imagery, when he's imagining image A, something in his mind, A, it activates a certain pattern of neurons which can be measured. And when he then removes that image A and starts imagining a radically different image B, a different pattern. So the accomplishment these guys are able to do is very quickly go from A, B quickly, many times a second. They can flip images in their imagination many times a second. Some people doing as many as 50, 60, 70 times a second. They get able to, it's like fast shifting between two images. And this can be verified in the functional MRI that the guy is doing it. He's not just saying, I've done it. You can't say that the claims of the meditator are not verifiable, because now with functional MRIs getting and doing brain scans, it is verified. When the guy says, I've quietened this part of me, you can verify that he's quietened this part of me. So, extraordinary mental feats, which are, here is a case where texts are there. The texts tell them how to do it. And there's a tradition of doing it. And there is empirical evidence the guys are there to do it. It's not somebody wrote something that was done supposedly, but people today are doing it. And then the scientific apparatus is able to measure. So you have a link between all the elements that constitute science. And this is at the cutting edge of neuroscience today. There are, I'm very excited about possibilities like in botany. Plants. The Indian text, late 1700s, wrote that some of the names in Ayurvedic texts that describe a certain plant's properties are so accurate that it's astounding that somebody named a plant in a way that reflects its properties so accurately. So how exactly did these guys do it? Well, if you look at their claims are not based on external material laboratory science as botanists would do it today, but based on what they consider to be their approach to pariksha, this mental investigative kind of approach. So we have in order to do justice to ancient Indian science, these are some of the issues that you have to raise at a meta level. I mean, are you going to I agree that you should subject it to verifiability. That is absolutely true. But are you going to require consistency and conformity and compatibility with Western models? I hope not. I hope that you take the audacious approach of the acupuncturist which I gave, and say, well, if it, as long as we can show it, that it works, then, we have as good a chance that our model is right. And maybe there's multiple models that are right, just like physics and the social sciences don't have the same model. So maybe we have a model that is valid also, and they have a model which is contradictory, but that is also valid. But what is empirically proven has to be respected. So I would caution against the dogma, scientific dogmatism. I'm glad that Professor Srivastava mentioned Vedic dogmatism and Sanskrit dogmatism, which says that just because it's written must be true, and I'm a full supporter of that, his point of view. But I would say the opposite point of view, which I have seen also, which says that we have to dismiss it by its very nature, is equally unscientific. We cannot, as scientists, dismiss no matter how ridiculous the claim without subjecting it to test. So this is a case that there may well be a new approach to science that we will discover from the study of Indian traditions, that it is not lending itself and not fair to try and map it to a Western, a modern approach of science and limit it only to that. We have to understand it on its own terms. We have to measure it for validity and take seriously its claims. We have to be very good at throwing out all the quacks, all the quackery, which I mentioned some examples, and be very rigorous in what we accept, because only a hard-nosed approach of this kind will be able to put such traditional Indian science on a solid platform and be able to give us R&D which is useful for the future. Thank you.